of Independent Living, INIL, and ILO on personal assistance services. I'm Stefan Trömel, Senior Disability Specialist in the ILO. And let me already start by thanking INIL for the work, because really all the work that has gone into this webinar and the report that we'll be sharing has been done by INIL. We in ILO have just been a facilitator. Let me share a few logistics, and then I will say a few more measures. Logistics, as you by now are all familiar with Zoom webinars. This is a Zoom webinar. You will be able to put on your closed captionings on the relevant button at the bottom. There will be a video that will be shown immediately after my initial presentation. The video also has closed captions. If you want, during that video, you want to disable your captions so that you don't have the two at the same time. You have both a Q&A and a chat possibility. If possible, use the chat more for technical issues if you have a problem, or perhaps for introducing yourself. It would be great to know who is on the call, who is on the webinar. And the Q&A, use it really for questions to the panel. If possible, make it clear to whom the question is. If it's a general question to the whole panel, you can also do it like that. As you can see, the webinar has started to be recorded, and we will be sharing the recording in a few days after the webinar. I checked this morning, we had about 180 people registered for the webinar. Right now we have 50 something. So I think there has been a lot of interest. But of course, sometimes because of time zone or other commitments, people cannot join online, but people will be able to watch the webinar at their own pace and time at a later stage. Let me make a few very brief comments, and then I explain very briefly the agenda, but you have seen it perhaps already. So basically, the timing of this webinar and the timing of the report that has been prepared by INIL is very important. You will have seen that end of last year, the UN declared the International Day of Care and Support. There has been a strong push for some years now to get more attention in the general discussion around the care economy, which is an important topic within the ILO, more attention to persons with disabilities. I get sometimes the question from my own colleagues and others, what is this difference between care and support? And now one, of course, could argue that a well understood concept of care is very comprehensive and would not require the separate term of support. But it's also fair to say that very often, historically and still now, the way in which care is provided to persons with disabilities is in a way which is not empowering, which is not done based on the preferences and choices of persons with disabilities. And this is where this term support comes in. No? It's a permanent reminder that persons with disabilities need to be in the driving seat when their support needs, their care and support needs are being designed. And that is not always the case, and it's not yet the case. No? And I think this is why also I think our webinar is so important today, because for me, really, the personal assistance services, and we will hear today from experts with lived experience, people that are definitely using themselves, personal assistance services. Personal assistance services for me are the embodiment of this difference between care, this passive recipient of care, and support. No? So I think so I'm very excited today to be able to have this joint seminar, as I said, joint webinar. As I said, thanks a lot for INIL to have taken the lead, because INIL is really the top cutting edge expert on this issue. We will have, after my initial words, which are coming to an end, there will be a video where you will see a personal assistance user and also the provider. We will have Lilia Angelova-Mladidoma from INIL, who is the expert that has written the report. We have then Naoki Okamoto from the Japanese Council on Independent Living Centers, JIL. We then have with us also Amalia Gamion. Amalia, good to see you on the screen. Nice colors, as always. Amalia is a member of the CRPD committee, of the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, who, as you know, produced recently a general comment on decentralization. So great, Amalia, that you could share us. And I know that you are in Geneva these days. attending the meeting of the CRPD committee. So thanks a lot for finding the time to be with us today. After Mali, we will have Jamie Bolling, who is co-chair of of ILO-ENIL, of the Independent National, and also a member of the Independent Living Institute in Sweden. Then we will follow that with a Q&A session, which I will try my best to moderate. And then we will have some closing words from Nadia Haddad as co-chair of the Independent Network of Independent Living. So without further ado, Amalia, I think I would ask you not to put the camera on so that we have the full screen for other speakers. And now our colleague Rita from ILO-ENIL will be sharing the video.
Hi, my name is Antonella, I'm 27 and I'm from Italy. I moved to Brussels a year and a half ago. Having a personal assistant changed my life because I could move to another country to achieve my career goals. And I managed to live independently without the help of my family members. So this is very important for me from both a professional and personal point of view. In my case, being supported by Janece, my personal assistant, helps because I live in a not wheelchair accessible environment and city. So without her help, I couldn't reach many public spaces, for example. So I would miss many opportunities and possibilities to participate in events like job meetings or trainings, but also laser moments with friends. I'm Malce and I'm from Italy as well. I'm 28 and I'm the personal assistant of Antonella. I can see my role it's to help Anto to get the same opportunities that all people have. This means, for example, make her independent in her personal life or having no limitation under our work perspective. But in general, there isn't, in my opinion, a specific area in which I work. Personally, I define this profession gratifying, and secondly, never boring or static. And you have the complete possibility to make the difference in the daily life step by step. I feel more independent, more responsible and happy in my life because I feel like I have all the opportunities that other people have. And the search for a personal assistant can be extremely complicated for many people in many areas of the world. Having a personal assistant is like privilege rather than a right. I don't receive funds. I receive a monthly disability allowance, so I could hire my personal assistant with that, and especially with the help of my family. It's really hard to find a PA. I had another one in the past, like during the university, so for like 3 years. And then for the rest of the time, I've always been assisted by my family, my mom and my sisters. It happens that people want to ask me questions or I ask them questions and they reply not looking at me, but directly looking at Ante. I think this, happens a lot. Maybe because they think I'm not like independent in answering or yes. You have really to be strength to remember that there shouldn't be injustice. Norman.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that video of Antonella, prepared by ILO-ENIL. also last year already for in the occasion of the International Day of Care and Support. Let me now introduce to all of you Lilia Angelova-Mladenova. I hope I pronounce your name not too wrongly, who is the top expert who prepared the report that we will now also be sharing. I think, Rita, you can do that. We will share the link to the report and to the fact sheet in the chat box. Lilia, over to you.
Thank you, Stefan. I will briefly present the background to the report, the methodology, and some of the key recommendations. So, as Stefan noted, there's been a growing interest in care and support in recent years. However, discussions tend to focus on people providing care and support, for example, looking at the need to improve their working conditions, or when it comes to unpaid care, the need to reduce or redistribute unpaid care and support work. Now, the perspective of those receiving care and support, just persons with disabilities, is often lacking. So what the report tries to do is to incorporate the perspective of persons with disabilities into these discussions. This is important to ensure that care and support policies promote the rights of people providing as well as those receiving support, and do not enforce and do not reduce persons with disabilities to passive objects of care and support, reinforcing the outdated medical perspective of disability. The research focuses on personal assistance, as this is a key service for the realization of the rights of persons with disabilities to live independently and be included in the community set out in Article 19 of the Convention. What was the methodology of the research? Since there is a wide variety of personal assistance services across the countries, the first step was to identify inclusion criteria to help us choose among these countries. So we had the following inclusion criteria. We were looking for services which involve one-on-one relationships, where the person with disability has a say in determining the tasks of the assistant and where the assistant is paid for their work. The service also had to be provided for at least 2 years to allow for accumulation of data and experience. It needed to have a national regional coverage, to be publicly funded, at least partially, and not to be limited to specific thematic areas such as education and employment. Based on this inclusion criteria, we conducted a non-exhaustive mapping of personal assistance services across the world, aiming to identify countries where personal assistance services exist. The methods used were literature review and consultations. The next stage was to select countries for further research, and among those identified to have personal assistance services, and we selected the following 9 countries: Costa Rica, Thailand, Serbia, Bulgaria, Japan, Republic of Korea, Taiwan, England, Slovenia, and Sweden. We saw diversity in terms of region and income group. However, you will see that the majority of the countries are from Europe and Asia and include high and upper income countries mostly. This is because during the mapping stage, we did not identify low-income countries, nor countries in Africa and the Arab state that met the inclusion criteria. The final stage of the research involved further desk research, looking into how the service is organized and provided in the selected countries, where we did desk research and consultations again. We had a number of challenges and limitations during the research. There is a wide variability in the quality and quantity of information across the different countries. This is due to various factors. One of them is the language barrier, as the analysis relied primarily on information in English, Spanish, and Bulgarian. This issue was, however, partly addressed through country consultations. Another factor was the limited public availability of information in some countries, and the language proficiency was not sufficient to overcome this challenge. The study's constrained time frame, which was approximately 1 month, was also a hindrance to gather more comprehensive information. It is also important to note that the report does not capture the diversity within the countries. In many countries, there are significant variations between municipalities in the way the service is organized and provided. There are also differences between the different providers, and this diversity is not accounted for in this report. The finding and recommendation, the report provides finding and recommendations in two main areas. One is on how to ensure that personal assistance service promote independence and inclusion of persons with disabilities. And the other is on how to ensure decent working conditions for personal assistance. With regard to promoting independence and inclusion of persons with disability, key is to adopt a funding model which allows persons with disabilities to determine how the money for their support is spent. This means that disabled people are allocated certain budget to cover the cost for their assistance. Then they can choose whether to employ an assistant themselves or use public-private organization or cooperative to help with administering the service. In many countries, however, persons with disabilities are unable to do this, unable to direct the funding themselves, and have to use services that are provided in kind. This means they have to accept the conditions of the services, having limited influence over the design of the service. For example, they may need to accept assistants that are not suitable, or the hours of the service might not be suitable. It is also important to ensure equal access across the country to personal assistance. Different rules and funding levels across the regions lead to inconsistencies in the quality of the service, and also limit the mobility of persons with disabilities who may be unable to move to a different region if this would mean losing on their support. Another important recommendation is that the service should cover all costs associated with the provision of the service. This includes taxes and insurances related to the salaries of assistants, but also administrative costs, transportation costs, and other. Various challenges arise when this is not observed. For example, in some countries, the limited coverage of transport costs have made recruiting assistants very difficult, especially for people living in remote and rural areas. In some countries also, there is a requirement for persons using the service to contribute financially to their support, which makes the service inaccessible and unaffordable, especially for persons with higher support needs. To adequately meet the support needs of persons with disabilities, the funding should be based on individual needs assessment, and also the service needs to be available 24/7. There are countries where the service is only provided in regular office hours, 9 to 5 during weekdays, which deprives persons with disabilities from access to support in the evenings and during the weekend. Across countries, there is a key factor for the effectiveness of the services being the availability of training and support for persons with disabilities, including and especially from peers. This will involve support with recruiting and managing personal assistance, or understanding rights and responsibilities, managing conflict, and etc. And last but not least, it is essential when assessing the quality of assistance schemes, the focus to be on their overall impact on persons with disabilities. For example, whether the service enables persons with disabilities to access education, employment, leisure, political participation. Shifting the focus to personal assistance, the research shows the potential of the service to contribute to job creation. The number of personal assistant jobs in the countries varies depending on the coverage of the assistance programs and the funding available. The countries with the highest number of personal assistants are England and Korea, with more than 100,000 assistants in each country. Available data show also that the majority of personal assistants, which is across the countries, are women. There is significant workforce shortages, which means that people willing to work as personal assistants are fewer than what is needed. This is mainly due to low and unattractive wages, especially in recent years. The lack of visibility and recognition of personal assistant profession has also been a factor. Interestingly, however, there's been a low turnover among personal assistants compared to other similar jobs, which shows that there is a higher job satisfaction in this profession compared to other similar occupations. And lastly, to present some of the recommendations on how to ensure decent working conditions of personal assistant. The first is to ensure that there are adequate pay rates. It is strongly recommended that personal assistants' wages are regularly reviewed and adjusted to reflect the costs of living increases. Personal assistants, like a person using the service, also need to have access to support, including from their peers. Improving job stability and security is important. Also, the report finds that while some of the countries rely on migrants for personal assistance services, migrants are at increased risk of job loss and income insecurity due to uncertainty related to their work permit, which is often granted for a certain period of time. 0-hour contracts leading to unpredictable monthly income also lead to job insecurity in some countries. It is important to improve the visibility of personal assistant profession and the recognition of the role of personal assistants, and to ensure their training and development opportunities for the personal assistants, guided by the persons using services. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Lydia. As mentioned before, we will be sharing the link to the report and an accompanying fact sheet and an infographic that we have prepared with support. I mean, led by the European Network of Independent Living, as mentioned before. I will make no comments to what we've just heard, but it's definitely very interesting. And some of it definitely resonates a lot with some of the more general discussions that we have within the ILO on the challenges that care workers face. But let me now move to the next speaker, Naoki Okamoto, board member of the Japanese Council on Independent Living Centers, GIL. Naoki, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just now being introduced to you. I'm Naoki Okamoto, the representative of CL Fuju in Fuju City, Tokyo. I'll be presenting on PA service in Japan, including the characteristic. Might not have good English, but please listen. Next slide, please. About Japan's personal assistance system, evolving into service to be proud of worldwide. Japan's personal assistance system has unique characteristics compared to systems in Western countries. These include the fact that it's not a direct payment system and service gain only through service providers' intervention. Specifically, it is possible to determine the amount of service provision for over 24 hours. With certain training, one can provide medical care such as suctioning sputum and managing gastric tube, enabling individuals with ALS or muscular disorder to live in the communities. Training for assistants hung over during hospitalization, and in various other sceneries also available. However, there are challenges concerning education and economic activities, as this system cannot be utilized in those areas. This is attributed to the nature of the system, which depends on the number of applicants and tax revenue. Please, next slide. What is experience access personal assistance system assistance? The utilization of PA is determined by interregional disparities and the ability to community-wide local administration. Essentially, function the medical model mechanic. I'm currently 41 years old, diagnosed with beta muscular dystrophy, using a power wheelchair for mobility and CPAP device device during a sleep. I began living independently at 22 when my disability was mild and I could self-transfer between bed and wheelchair, relying on short-term assistance services. As I entered my 30s and my limitation increased, I transitioned to PA. However, there is a region disparity in the allocation of PA service due to municipal finance. Initially in Sapporo City, Hokkaido, when I decided the allocation was 330 hours with a municipal upper limit of 620 hours, primarily targeting those with muscular disorder requiring ventilator support or significant motor disability due to cerebral palsy. Following a roses by a CP user not covered by the upper limit, allocation were increased to 420 and 540 hours, which his allocation set at 540 hours. At 33, after receiving a power wheelchair grant, I moved to Cho City, Tokyo, where I currently receive 671 hours, enabling me to live with the assistance I require. Next slide, please. How did it improve your quality of life and your access to the right services? Easy access to employment. PA has improved my life, allowing me to engage in community activity and contribute to society. While short-term home helper was sufficient, when my activity of daily living were higher, the progressive nature of my disability means that what I could do today, I might not be able to do tomorrow, often resulting in a night spent in uncomfortable position alone. With PA, allocation are tailored to individual needs, making easy to access assistance such as nighttime disposition and support during outing, enhancing my quality of life. However, assistance during work hour is not covered, and I must pay it for privately. While some municipalities promote pilot projects, Sofu City has not implemented such measures. Next, please. As coordination, personal assistance descent, and how does this impact quality? Voice of the coordinator. My office coordinator says that not sure and it is not appropriate. Masatoshi Nishidate, who is in his 16th year as a PA, said, not sure, because prices are rising, it is difficult to continue working as a helper unless wages align with price rises. Considering the future and the issue of securing human resources remains. Yoki Horikoshi, who is in his 11th year as a PA, said, not appropriate because it is an unstable job and should be more stable. Next slide, please. My opinion in this is as follows. In conclusion, I can say that it's not appropriate. Compared to other home helper services, the pay is lower, leading to many major companies not providing the service. Even smaller companies often do not offer it, and the number of cases of bankruptcy increasing every year when it is difficult to hire enough staff. While the government has introduced a boost system called the Treatment Improvement Allowance, improving conditions for helpers and certain conditions, the caregiving sector still faces significantly low wages. Despite the economy showing signs improvement, recruitment remains challenging, with many still working long hours to make ends meet. Additionally, there are suits of excessive labor, where individuals cannot rest even during nighttime hours, indicating the need for further evaluation. Female helpers tend to be less willing to work longer, perhaps because of life events such as pregnancy and childbirth, or because of better support such as maternal leave. And it acknowledges that it may be more difficult to secure human resources as contaminated more and more overseas workers being employed, mainly urban areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Naoki, and thank you also in particular for bringing in the voice of your two personal assistants. It shows the number of years they've been working with you, shows also what Lydia mentioned before, that there is a rather low turnover in the sector, so a high level of motivation, even in a context where often the working conditions are definitely not ideal and probably also getting worse. And interesting also to see this last comment, because that's also something we are looking at in the ILO context, which is the overrepresentation of migrant workers in the provision of personal assistance services, also mentioned by Livia in the report, because that is also something, a characteristic that we see in many care contexts. Let me now move to the next speaker, Amalia Gamio. As mentioned before, Amalia is a member of the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So Amalia, you have heard, you know the topic very well, but I would really like to hear your views on what the committee has done so far, and also what the committee is planning to do even more on this very important topic. Amalia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stefan. I am very happy to be here. I am not looking the slides, but I will try to make this. What is the place of personal assistance in the CRPD? Well, personal assistance is present directly and indirectly in the whole CRPD, because in order to achieve the purpose of it, which is to promote, protect, and ensure the full and equal enjoyment of all human rights and fundamental freedoms by all persons with disabilities, and to promote respect for their inherent dignity, for many persons with disabilities, access to a range of individualized support services is a prerequisite for living independently in the community. Next slides, please. Even in the preamble, recognizing the importance of individual autonomy and independence, including the freedom to make one's own decisions for persons with disabilities. It says in the preamble. So, because individual autonomy and independent, it is impossible for some persons with disabilities without personal assistance. Next slide, please. As I said before, personal assistance is all over the CRPD. You can see on the slide the title of each article of, maybe you remember it, Article 12, Article 13, Article 16, Article 19, Article 20, Article 21, Article 23, Article 26, Article 28, and Article 13. Next slide, please. Article 5 It's in regard to general obligations, said, provide information that is accessible to persons with disabilities on mobile aids, technical devices, and assistive technologies, including new technologies, as well as other forms of assistance and support services and facilities. It says in many articles of the Convention. Next slide, please. Only as an example, Article 19, live independently and to be included in the community, says, persons with disabilities have access to a range of home, residential, and other community support services, including such personal assistance as is necessary to facilitate their existence and inclusion in the community, and to prevent their isolation or separation from the community. This is very important. Next slide, please. How is it developed in General Comment number 5 and the guidelines on the institutionalization, including in emergencies? Okay, guidelines emphasize that persons with disabilities are subjects of rights and holders of rights. It says the general principles of the Convention in Article 3, in particular, respect for the inherent dignity, autonomy, and independence of the persons, Article 3A, and full and effective participation and inclusion in society, Article 3C, are the basis for the right to live independently and to be included in the community through the creation of forms of support that enhance the full exercise of their rights, such as personal assistance and call for community facilities to conform to the principles of universal design. Next slide, please. It defines personal assistance, that is to self-directed or user-directed human support that is made available to a person with disability as a tool to enable independent living, all around to independent living. The forms of personal assistance may vary, and they should provided on an individualized basis. It should be controlled by and allocated to the person with disability. It is based on an assessment of the individual needs and life circumstances of each person. The service is controlled by the person with disability. They should plan it and decide by whom, how, when, where, and in what manner it is provided, as well as instruct and direct that persons providing it. Should not be shared. It is very important. Next slide, please. Individualized support services should be considered a right, not a concession. It is a right. Persons with disabilities have the right to choose services and their providers according to their individual needs and personal preferences. They are not limited to services provided in the home. It can extend to employment, education, and political and cultural participation, recreation, and all. They should all be designed to facilitate life in the community and avoid isolation and separation from others. It relates personal assistance to other articles of the Convention because all of these are in relation. Next slide, please. And guidelines on the institutionalization, including emergency situation, that are approved by the committee in 2022, emphasize and further develop the concepts of personal assistance contained in Article 19 and General Comment number 5, like individualized support by themselves and everything we talk about. It highlights that all persons with disabilities should have access to personal assistance, regardless of requirements for support in exercising legal capacity. This is a prerequisite to to be included in the community, to exercising legal capacity. Support services for living independently should be available, accessible, acceptable, affordable, and adaptable. Support services include personal assistance, peer support, supportive caregivers for children in family setting, crisis support, support for communication, support for mobility, provision of assistive technology, support in securing housing and household help, and other community-based services. Next slide, please. But guidelines extend personal assistance on affordable housing, decent work, transportation, and long-term economic and social support. Next slide, please. How can personal assistance lead to a paradigm shift from the care model? This is a very important. Care was taken not to express at any time the situation of support in terms that could be confused with care, since it was essential to highlight the importance of autonomy, dignity, and independence of persons with disabilities for decision-making, sometimes with support, but taking into account that this should be low respect for the will and preferences of persons with disabilities, allowing personal choice and control and flexibility to adapt to persons' needs and not to other way around. Finally, I should to say, our committee considers that the term care returns to protectionist approaches prior to the convention, reinserts in the collective imagination the idea that persons with disabilities are not capable of making their decisions with support, but required to be cared for throughout medical personnel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Amalia, for showing the relevant global legal framework that that supports the rights of persons with disabilities, and in particular is relevant for the provision of support. Thank you also for this distinction between care and support. I think a modern understanding of care will cover support, but I think that is what I said at the beginning, no? But some people were not joined yet. The reference to support also in the International Day that was decided last year is this permanent reminder that for persons with disabilities, the old-fashioned type of care in institutions without them taking decision are definitely not what persons with disabilities want. And that's this paradigm shift that the CRPD embraces in so many contexts, but also in this very specific key context. Thanks again, Amalia, for joining us during your very busy stay here in Geneva during the current CRPD committee session. Let me now move on to the next speaker, Jamie Bolling, who is from the who is co-chair also of the Independent Network Independent Living, but she's also specifically from the Independent Living Institute from Sweden. So, Jamie, over to you.
Thank you very much, Stefan, and it's a pleasure to be here today. I'd like to thank the ILO for conducting this report and facilitating both the report and the conference, and putting personal assistance higher on the agenda, which we feel is very, very important. When it comes to care, I need care when I'm sick, but I need support to make my life work. That's how I differentiate between the two. But unfortunately, we have both care and vulnerable people in our large legislations at the EU level, which keeps us back in this old trend of being protected and taken care of. If I go to the next slide, it's just a quote from Otto Fratzka, who actually brought the concepts of independent living and personal assistance to Sweden back in the late 70s, early 80s. He also was, because of him, there was the first pilot project on personal assistance carried out. He founded STIL, the Stockholm Independent Living Cooperative, the first cooperative to actually provide personal assistance, as well as the organization where I work today, the Independent Living Institute. He said, we are tired of non-disabled people deciding over our lives. We want the same freedom and the same responsibilities as others. and he's my great mentor. Next slide. Back in the 80s, it was a bad time for people with disabilities. Many people lived in institutions. They find that there was a lot of breaches on human rights. So we needed a disability reform, which then came in '94 with a legislation called LSS that actually provides personal assistance as one of the rights, one area of support. There's actually 10. So it was a reform that was needed to close the institutions. In order to close them, we needed a political decision to decide that disabled people are worth what they're worth and worth more than living in institutions. And that then we needed the different services to be able to make this possible. So LSS, which is a special legislation for support and service for disabled people, some disabled people, not everybody, there are categories, which I'll go into, so we don't consider it the best of legislation. I mean, it's a fantastic legislation, but it's not perfect. It came in effect in 1994, which is interesting to note because this is 13 years before we signed the convention. So already then the authorities were thinking about self-determination, empowerment, and the right to equality for disabled people. I'll get back to the 3 categories in administration in the next slides if we go forward. The 10 measures, I won't talk about them. Here's a list. You see that personal assistance is number 2, but there's also advice and support, escort service, personal contact relief service in home, short stay away from home, housing arrangements for children, adult daily activity. We'll go on. I'm going quickly because I know my 10 minutes is limiting. Next slide. LSS does say that assistance is supposed to be provided so that we have good lives, that I have a good life, that I can have, when I'm assessed, it includes all areas of my life so that I can be in my home, but outside of my home, that I can have education and access to work, to travel, to social life, family life, and recreation. Next slide. So it is, as said, personal assistance is an individual right, which according to LSS, and if you aren't happy with the decision that you get at the court, you can appeal it to the administrative court. Next slide. Who has the right to personal assistance? People from the age of 0 to 65. After 65, as in my case, I'm now 69, but I had personal assistance before 65, so I can keep the access to my service. There's one category is for people with autism and autism-like diagnosis. The second category is people with brain injury. Unfortunately, this slide didn't come out as it was supposed to. And the third category is where I fall with people with physical disability and intellectual disability, where it affects your daily life. Next slide. On the needs assessment, we are assessed. We also have to have doctor certificates that show that we have our disability, the needs that we have. It's an open interview with lots of questions. And then after this interview, you decide how many hours per week, we count per week, do I need in order to make my life go round with equality, the perspective of equality. Next slide. Let's see, division of needs. In Sweden, you divide up the needs, what we call basic needs and personal needs. The basic needs allows you to qualify to either personal assistance at the city level, municipal level, or the state level. So basic need are self-care, it's getting in and out of bed, it's personal hygiene, it's being able to eat, getting dressed, undressed, communication with others, or support where there's required extensive knowledge about the person. Then the personal needs is everything else, being able to go and get to work, things that aren't basic needs. It's helping me to take care of my grandchildren or my other daughter or my granddogs. Next slide. Personal assistance is a direct payment, and we feel it has to be a direct payment where I have the access to the money and can decide how I want to administrate it. It is funded by the Swedish tax system, the social insurance system, and there's a flat rate per hour, which is reviewed annually. It doesn't always keep up with inflation, even though I know many countries think it's high. In Sweden, it's about 310 crowns per hour. but I'll get to what it covers in a minute. Next slide. So base state funding, you have to have at least 20 hours of basic needs, then you get your funding through the state. Those first 20 hours will always be paid by the municipality. So Sweden is a country where we divide the responsibility between the state and municipality. We're hoping that this will be changed in 2026. There's been an inquiry about this because it keeps people from not being able to move from one community to the municipality to another, because you never know if you're going to get the same service when you get to the next place. Next slide. So the municipality then funds people who have less than 20 hours per week basic needs, even though the needs could be up to 90, 100, whatever hours per week. So it's not the maximum, but it's a minimum that makes this difference. Next slide. The choice we have, it's a direct payment, but I can decide, do I want to organize the service myself and have my own company? I didn't want that. I'm a bookkeeper from the beginning. I didn't want to go back to that. But I can also choose a cooperative, which is what I did. I belong to the Independent Living Cooperative here in Sweden. You can decide to have it through a company, but you can also decide to keep your service within the municipality. Next slide. They then would administrate. The cooperative, like Steel, it does more than just administrating my assistance, but it also develops us as work leaders through empowerment, learning about the legislation and everything that we need to know about the working legislation, etc., to be managers of our personal assistants. There's empowerment training. There's training for personal assistants. We want to make sure and guarantee that we do have assistance with quality, and people with intellectual impairment will have a support with an extra, a vice work leader to be able to help them if they themselves cannot take the decisions that need to be taken. Next slide. The development of the user as work leaders is important, as I just said, for the empowerment, because we're going to lead staff. We decide what, how, and when, who is going to be my assistant, and when and what and how are we going to do the work. I consider my assistants as my team. We're a team together that makes my life function. So that, without them, I can't do the things. I can't get out of my bed to start the day, to start off with, and then everything else that's needed throughout the day to get me to work, to go on an international work meeting, or to be sick at home or whatever. So it's important for me that the personal assistants are satisfied with the job they have. That it's important then to evaluate this fairly regularly. We have talks all the time, but once a year we'll have a more formal meeting on an evaluation of the assistance and how it's working, looking also at risk areas so that we're making sure there's no risk, or at least minimizing them as much as possible. As it's important, you look at during these evaluations, you see what kind of training is necessary for the person. I've had all different kinds of people work for me, so different training is needed. We do believe that I myself am responsible and do most of the on the work job training, but we may need extra training like work, in English, the heart of the lung training, for example, so that the people know how to do this. Or if it's a conflict, how do you work with conflicts, for example, if they were to arise. I do have right now an assistant who is a refugee. It is true that we have quite a lot of refugees working in the field in Sweden. It is a good way of stepping into the work field. It's an area where they then can learn a lot about the country and how it works. This person right now is going a course with the Red Cross on integration to learn better Swedish from our communication, but also on how Sweden works. Now I've probably gone so fast, I probably forgot some things, but next slide should be the end, I think. Yes. Thank you very much. You can get a hold of me at jamie.bowling.independentliving.org. And on our website, you'll find things. You'll find the library where there's different articles on personal assistance. And I thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Jamie. Again, a very, very interesting one issue that surprised me, for instance, from the presentation from Naoki was this fact that that the personal assistance service is not covered during employment times. I mean, during employment. No? So that's interesting to. That I think is a shortcoming of that. But we have now 15 minutes for a question and answer. We have received a few questions in the Q&A box. I have looked at 4 of them. I see there's a 5th now, which I've not looked at yet. But let me already start with the first 2. And I start with Lydia and as the person who drafted the report to address them. Please then I ask the others to come in. The first question is we got a couple of questions around the role of family members. No? In some countries, in some contexts, for certain persons, the support to be provided through a family member could be the preferred choice. But then there's an issue there in terms of coverage of expenses of that. So that is the first question. And then a similar question from another participant is around the pro and cons between personal assistance service provided by family members versus other, and also the issue between pro and con between a direct payment system like you have in Sweden versus the voucher system, which I think is more in line with the Japanese model, no? Where you basically you don't get the funding, you basically get these number of hours, but you don't get a direct payment. No? So these are the 2 questions, 2 or 3 questions that come. So perhaps Lilia, perhaps you can give it a first go, but then I also other colleagues from ILO to come in on that if they want.
Thank you, Stefan. Yeah, the questions about the family members as assistants has been very controversial. There are very diverse opinion on this. We haven't covered explicitly this in the research, but I'm sure that Jamie and Naoki could share experience from their countries. In many countries, especially countries in Europe, it is possible for family members to be a personal assistant. Some people do prefer assistance from family members, or others find it more difficult to control their support when it's provided by assistant. However, haven't looked into particular into this question. And also there is I saw there is a lot of interest in some specifics related to the provision of the service, which only shows the need for further research and more examples on how the service is organized in different countries. But I suggest that Jamie and Naoki contribute now with regard to family members as assistants.
Yes, thank you, Lilia. Jamie, please come in. But you also got another question in the Q&A from Sanya Tarchai, which is basically asking the question because in these 3 categories that you explained that are covered by the Swedish legislation, the question is around what about persons with sensory impairments like deafblind persons or other groups? They seem to be not covered by legislation. So perhaps you could also address that issue apart from the issue of related to family members.
Okay, I can't put on my video, but I can take the word from here. When it comes to the first question of family, I know through having been the director of ILO and I'm the president of ILO that some countries think different ways. There's the thought that if the family takes over, the person with the disability won't have the same power. And so, I mean, but at the same time, I say that as an individual and through the independent living movement, I say it's better you don't have your family because there's different, expectations of a family member. They might not want to do exactly what you want them to do, where a personal assistant should do what you want them to do when you want them to do it. But it was the mothers in Sweden who were the very strong lobbyists to get this legislation passed because they wanted to access the labor market. So they wanted out of the family and out of having to have this responsibility. But at the same time, when there's a crisis in the night and the assistant doesn't come, the family's there. So in Sweden, if you were to say the family members cannot be personal assistants, there would be a lot of people against this because most people do have family members at one time or another who will who would do the work, because we feel that the work needs to be done. I have the access to my hours. They need to be done. I can choose who is going to carry out those hours. And I don't choose my husband or my kids to do this. I prefer my personal assistants, but my husband has helped me. When it comes to the three categories, yes, you're right. That's why we don't consider the Swedish legislation as a perfect legislation. It does cause some competition between the areas of disabilities, because if you're blind, deaf, you do not have access to personal assistance. They took it to the highest court, and they got no, you're not in these areas. But there are many other services which you do have access to. For example, also guides as and access to transport. But you see that these are, how do you say, these services are diminishing when you have cuts in the society, which means that then people who are blind or deaf have a less better life, because they're more, how do you say, they're more trapped in their house because they're not getting out, when they get less hours for transport access and when they get less hours for guide persons. So yes, there's many disabilities which aren't covered in the area. I guess that was the two answers you needed.
Thank you. Thank you, Jamie.
You're welcome.
There was one more question, which Jamie, you addressed somehow when you explained the Swedish system in terms of how it's funded. It's interesting to see this co-funding somehow between the municipal level and the state level, and it comes from the tax budget. But also we got a question from Andrea Parra about that. I think Andrea is from Colombia, and it's definitely also, I mean, and as it came out also from the report that Lilia did, it's clear that well-established personal assistance services like the ones that were explained today, you only find them right now as such in European country, in OECD countries, in richer countries. No? So any reflection either from Jamie or Lilia in terms, or Naoki, in terms of where the funding comes from or should come from to cover these services? Jamie, over to you. Perhaps you start, and then
when it comes to Sweden, we see we want and we push for, and I think it will finally be decided in 26 that the state should take the overall responsibility. One, because then you have the choice of moving around the country from one city to the next, because you have cities in Sweden which are definitely much poorer than other cities in Sweden. The smaller cities or the rural cities, it can be harder to get access to personal assistance. So I live in a smaller city in a rural city, and I do have access. So we say that it should be state funded, so that you have this possibility of moving within the country. I know that, I mean, it is a cost. It is a cost, and it has to be a political decision that the country decides to take this cost. And there's no way around that because otherwise it's going to be up to, if you do, for example, what's the word, when you look at you look at wages and what you're earning, it's only the people earning high salaries that would have the possibility of hiring a personal assistant. Or in some countries where you have another legislation where it'll be where you import people, what do you call it? You bring in immigrants from, say, the Philippines or Thailand, who are known to do family support services, that they come in. But this, for us, we want the personal assistance to be part of the overall employment market. I hope I answered.
Yes, thank you very much, Jamie. Lilia, perhaps one question specifically coming in just right now in terms of whether there's any research on personal assistance services provided to people with mental disability, it says. I'm not sure whether that probably covers both intellectual or psychosocial disabilities around that. And then we also have a more general question around how much the CRPD framework can be used to make states legally responsible to provide personal assistance services versus something that would need to be financed by individuals themselves. I mean, I can give that a go. It's not an easy one, but perhaps Lilia, you can address this other one. And if you have, in this research you've done, you've also looked at this issue about whether coverage of services while the person that is receiving the service is in employment, whether that is also something that sometimes is excluded, sometimes is covered, that would also be interesting. Thank you.
In terms of research for people with intellectual disabilities, yes, there are. I have to look. I cannot name right now examples. I have to look into this. Can provide later. In Sweden, actually, there is a tradition of providing an established model of providing personal assistance for people with intellectual disability. IAC is the organization. They're a member of ILO, who is organizing the assistance and supporting the provision, the cooperative as well. I think that Noki could also contribute to some of these questions with regard to funding. If I go back a bit, funding for personal assistance and the family members, would be interesting to see the perspective of Japan. Just wanted to say that about the availability of personal assistance service in low-income countries, it's not just for personal assistance, it's in general. There are fewer investment in care and support services in this region, so it's a more general issue. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Lilia. And perhaps that's also sometimes where the family support, but which would need to be compensated, could perhaps fill in a gap. It's not ideal sometimes if that's the only option, but sometimes that can help. You have asked Naoki to come in. I also would like to ask Naoki to come in, perhaps with support of his interpreter, because there's also a question, Naoki, for you in the chat, which is basically the question is about whether people with neurodiverse conditions have also access to personal assistance support in Japan, so people with autism or other neurodiversity conditions. Over to you.
Okay, interpreter, I say, 直樹さんに質問があります。新しい障害分野と言われている自閉症の方とか、そういう方たちにもこの日本の、介助サービスというのは提供されているんでしょうか。
はい、日本語で答えます。そうですね、重度な知的障害とか、そういう方々、行動障害を伴うような方は、一部、情報が対象になる、パーソナルアシスタンスが使えることがあります。
So, according to Japanese legislation, yes, so those new emerging group of persons with disabilities, such as severely autistic conditions, person with disability, yes, they can utilize partially the personal assistance services ensured by the Japanese government.
Thank
Yes.
you. Yes, thank you very much. I'm not sure if there's any other question. Let me, well, there's a question around, perhaps Lilia or Jamie, you want to look into the question that relates with how do you ensure that if you make personal assistance services too professional, how to make sure that this would not exclude certain groups. I don't know whether you can quickly comment on that. I'm not sure whether that is a big problem, but it's a question we got.
I know that in Sweden at times there's been attempts to say that we have to have personal assistance in university degrees, etc. Where we feel that the training can be done. Anybody can be a personal assistant. I mean, I learned as a young parent that I had to give my daughter shots for her diabetes, so people can learn how to give shots, do different things when it even comes to different care areas. But and I agree. I don't want somebody from the medical field, because usually they're used to taking care of people, so they don't always hear what I'm telling them to do. They hear what they think they're going to be doing, and I'll say, do it my way, not your way. And so we think that you don't, but at the same time, we want the profession to be acknowledged, and that people should have a good salary. We compared at one time back in the beginning that what a person was paid to clean the floors of the parliament, and that was so much more than our personal assistants were paid, and yet we feel our lives are more important than the floor of the parliament. So we want professionalism, but it doesn't have to be where it becomes too professional that we don't find good assistance.
Thank you for that, Jenny. That's very clear. Just a final question that we got on how much you can use the UN Convention to demand. I mean, it was interesting in two of the presentations where sometimes legal challenges have been used, both in Japan and in Sweden, when people felt that they were not adequately treated. I think that's important. Whether overall in a developing country context, for instance, you can use the CRPD to somehow take the government to court in order to push for personal assistance schemes. I find that a bit difficult at this stage, but interesting to look into it. But definitely what I would say is that whenever funding is available, which is used in the wrong way, and in Sweden was a good example of moving away from institutions into personal assistance schemes. Sometimes funding is available in a country, but it's just used in a very wrong way. So there you would have a stronger case to say, well, this funding from now on needs to be reallocated from a care system which is absolutely old-fashioned and is not empowering to a much more rights-based approach in line with the CRPD. Anyway, this has been just the first attempt to approach this very important topic. I'm looking forward to more collaboration with INIL on this. There are a few areas that we have identified also in the report where more research will be welcomed, and I'll be back to INIL on that. As I said, I want to thank again, and I want to thank also in particular now Nadia Haddad, who will say the closing words as co-chair of INIL. And Nadia, through you, I want to thank again you and also other colleagues from INIL for this excellent collaboration. Over to you for the final closing words.
Thank you very much, Stefan. I will thank also all the participants for being here and the interpreter who facilitate the participation from NACIO. But firstly, there were a lot of questions, very interesting. I think that all the member states that ratified the conventions on the right of persons with disabilities has the obligation to provide all what is necessary and described within that convention. One is about the Convention of Child Access to School. All the member states who signed the Child Convention give children access to school. They have funding for it. They have legislation for it. They have professors for it. They have all what is needed. It should be the same with person assistance worldwide. It should not depend on the income of a welfare country. It should not depend on the culture. It should not depend on the cultural context or on the believing context. Wherever a person with disability needs support and assistance, should be available to have access to personal assistance. How that personal assistance should be, we heard a lot about different way of having access to direct payment is the best way. It can be done because then you can, the person who pays is the person who can have the lead and the control on it. Should personal assistant be trained or not trained? The best people in place to train the personal assistant are the person with disabilities themselves on what type of support they want. For me, for example, I'm using personal assistance since 2008. They are my hands, my legs, and they are executing, and they are made professional by the way they are trained, by the way they are also financed. If we ask for personal assistant to be multidisciplinary, to support us in many different tasks, and to be flexible. For something, we need something. So to pay for quality support, we need to have access to enough funding to be sure that we could provide and pay our assistants in a decent way, to keep also our assistants and to track other persons to start becoming also interested in the job of personal assistant. So definitely we need more research to see how we can realize a kind of blueprint, because if you add all the persons with disabilities together in one country, we will be a big factory employing a lot of people. So it should be money from the government that comes through us, but goes back to the government because we are hiring people. We will be kind of big company with a lot of social, economic, and political benefit for all. So I will thank everybody for being here, and I hope that this will be just to begin and also an eye-opener for the role that personal assistants can play to permit, together with a lot of other criteria and pillars of independent living, to realize a real inclusion for all persons with disabilities, regardless the type of disability they have, regardless the support need, the height of the support need, or the age they have, or the region they live, to be included in the community and live on equal level as all the other citizens. So thank you again, and I hope that we can continue to collaborate with ILO on this and provide more guidelines on how this can be a reality for all. Thank you all, and by this, I think we can close this webinar, and I hope that this will be a begin for a lot of others. Thank you all, and don't hesitate to contact us if you have more questions, or if you are not satisfied, or you want more details about the answers. We are there, we are here for this. Thanks a lot again, and see you in the next opportunity. Bye, everybody.